If you have difficulty with anger and you'd like to learn some tools and tips about how to control your anger, then stay tuned. Hi, this is Dirk Hansen, counselor and psychotherapist. And today we're going to be talking about how to control your anger. This is the second video in a series of how to control anger. Now, last time we talked a little bit about what is anger and why do you feel anger, and particularly focused on you as a unique person and how anger presents itself uniquely for everyone. It's a very personal thing. And of course we talked about the fact that anger is a normal emotion, but everybody experiences it slightly differently and on a pretty wide continuum. So, having looked at the what about anger and the why about anger for you, maybe on reflection, today we're going to talk more about, well, how do you control it? How do you deal with it when it does emerge? And maybe how do you learn to cope with it and shape it for your own life? So these are tools and tips that I'm going to share with you today. And to start, it's important to kind of go back to what we were talking about before in terms of understanding the what and the why of anger for you personally. So the first tool or the first tip is for you to begin to reflect on experiences you've already had with anger. Essentially keep a journal, an anger journal or an anger diary. Maybe you don't need to go back too far. Maybe there's enough things that you can write about right away. But I want you to break down each event and write down some important points about how you experience anger in particular events. There may be something that just happened recently that you can do this with. But if you take the event when you're journaling, and first of all, just talk about what happened. Just a few words about what it was that set things off. And in many cases, it's not anything particularly significant. Sometimes it is. But it's important to write down what it was that started the process, because that's going to be a clue as we go further into these tips around understanding your triggers. And that's really the first step, is to understand your unique triggers. So doing a journal, writing out a few events that you can break down in this way will be a good step forward in that respect. So on your journal, when you're looking at an event, firstly, what happened? Secondly, what did it feel like? When did you start to feel sensations of anger, some kind of, it started welling up inside you, you started to know, I'm getting angry here. And essentially, how far did that go? So talk about what it felt like. Thirdly, what did you do? Talk about your reaction. How far did it go? Was it shouting? Was it raging? Was it silent treatment? Whatever. And then finally, the fourth element of that analysis would be, what was the outcome? What happened? Were people hurt? Feelings were hurt? What was the outcome? Or maybe there was some kind of reconciliation. But it's important to break down the event in that particular way to serve that first tool, which is to understand your unique triggers. It's so important for you to understand triggers so that you can begin to be more aware of them and recognize them when they show up. The second tool in this process of learning to control your anger is to, once you've sort of begun to understand your triggers, unique triggers, is to understand better the physical sensations of anger for you. What does anger feel like for you? And the importance of this is because as you begin to analyze things and reflect, going forward, you're going to want to start to understand your anger reactions better. Up to this point, maybe anger is just something you've accepted that you can't control. It just happens, causes damage, and there's nothing you can do about it. Well, that's a fallacy. You can do something about it, and you can understand it better. So number 2 is to get attuned to the physical sensations of your anger. What does it feel like? And what does it feel like early on? And the reason I say early on is because when I talked last time about anger being a choice, there is a moment, it may be a very small moment, but there is a moment where you can choose the direction of that event and your reactions to that event. Earlier is better, so that it doesn't build up where you can, in fact, maybe not be able to manage your emotions at that juncture. So becoming more attuned to the physical sensations of your anger is very important. The third tool in learning to control your anger is, now that you've done a journal and you're more aware of the physical sensations, I want you to go back and do a critical review of these events. I'm not saying just be self-critical, but critically review how you handled these situations, looking for clues, and also inserting the possibility that maybe you could have handled it differently. And look for that. In fact, ask that question as you go back over these events. Ask the question, could I have handled this differently? And that may be an obvious question to ask, but in many cases, sometimes it's hard to envision that you would have handled it differently, particularly when you're in the heat of anger. You don't think there's any other way that you could handle it. But there is. And I think with that possibility beginning to imagine, could I have handled it differently, then maybe when something like that happens again, or the situation presents itself similarly, then you might try something different and you might have that opportunity going forward. So thirdly, do a critical analysis of these events. Again, asking the question, could I have handled this differently? Number 4 in this process is, now that you have some information, you've done some reflection and some analysis, is start thinking more proactively and learn to lower the intensity of your reactions to things. Okay? So if you're accustomed to lots of anger in your life and so on, is learn to lower the intensity of your reactions, meaning capture those reactions early on. Okay? And if you're finding that you're having difficulty lowering the intensity, step away. Take a time out. Even something physical like that is part of the process of learning to lower the intensity of your reactions. Gaining a little bit more control over your emotions, even if it has to be you have to remove yourself or you have to step away from a situation. Do that. Because it is part of the process, part of the learning process of how you can manage and control your anger more sufficiently and successfully. And then finally, number 5, go deeper. Now, last time I talked about why do you get angry? And I think it's quite important to have both those two things that you hold together. One is, what happens when I get angry? Are there ways that I can manage it? And so on. But until you actually look at why it's happening, where do those reactions come from? There might be some depth to these reactions and some real emotion that's misplaced or displaced. It's actually, the anger is being driven maybe by something that's not even that much related to what's going on. It's related to something else in your life, something in the past, something that's unresolved. It could be behavioral. It could be, again, the source of modeling from your childhood. It could be pain that you're trying to cope with and deal with in your life. Go deeper. And that's number 5. And I would say get help if needed in that process. There's counselors and therapists, people who specialize in anger, that can help you through that difficult time of confronting things that maybe you're not fully aware of, gaining more self-awareness, which will help you in the process of lowering the intensity, gaining control, particularly when you understand where these emotions are coming from. Something very personal. When you have that awareness and that understanding, it gives you a huge leap towards being able to control your anger. So that's some tools and some tips to help you control your anger. And again, in summary, we've looked at what is anger, what is it for you, where does it come from, and now some tools that you can apply to help you get through difficulties that you face, to become less reactive, have your reactions become less intense, but also to delve deeper into your life experience as you move forward through managing your emotions.